Hello and welcome. I'm Jennifer Holche, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're talking about how motivation can shift when we better understand what drives fear, effort, and confidence. And honestly, this is something that shows up everywhere. In my work as a third grade teacher and in my life as a parent, I've seen how quickly a child can shut down when a task feels too hard, too frustrating, or too risky. You may have seen that too in your classroom, at home, or in any setting where learning and growth matter. My partner, Myra Padilla, will later share examples from work with adult learners and colleagues, while I focus first on the children and students I've personally worked with. Together, our separate segments show how the same motivation principles apply across very different situations. The big idea behind this video is simple: motivation is not broken. More often, it breaks down because people believe the causes of successes and failures are outside their control. When we change those beliefs, we can change persistence, confidence, and action. Again, my name is Jennifer Holche, a third grade educator and parent of 5 children. In this opening segment, I'm welcoming you on behalf of both of us and setting up the conversation to share our examples on motivation and motivational theories and how we applied them into our own lives. Over the past month or so, both of us have applied motivation psychology in our own separate contexts, and those experiences gave us practical examples we can share with you today. I'll begin by introducing causal attribution theory and 2 strategies I use with children in my own life and practice. Later, my colleague will build on that with her own examples, and then I'll return to synthesize how these theories connect for diverse learners before she closes out with final reflections and a call to action. So let's dive in. I want to start with a question I ask myself often. When a child struggles or fails, what do they believe caused that outcome? That one belief matters because it often determines whether the child will try again, avoid the task, or just give up altogether. This is the foundation of causal attribution theory, which was developed by Bernard Weiner. In simple terms, the theory explains that the way people explain success and failure shapes their emotions, their motivation, and what they will do next. According to Weiner, people make attributions based on 3 key dimensions. First, there's locus. Is the cause internal, inside the person, like ability or effort, or external, like task difficulty or luck? Second, there's stability. Is the cause consistent over time, or does it change? And third, there's controllability. Can the person influence this outcome through their own actions? Let me give you an example from my own experience. This summer, I worked with one of my children, who we'll call Sally, who was 6 years old. Sally resisted chores constantly. She told me her brothers made the mess, the baby was too loud, or the task was too hard. Meanwhile, the other children were generally able to complete their responsibilities. When I looked at Sally's thinking through Weiner's framework, I realized she was blaming outside factors she felt she could not control. In other words, she was explaining the problem through external and uncontrollable causes. From her perspective, effort did not seem useful because the real problem always appeared to be somewhere else. That is an important motivation problem. When children believe outcomes are controlled mainly by outside forces, they often stop investing effort. If trying will not change anything, why try? That question sits underneath a lot of resistance we see in children. Before my colleague takes over in the next segment, I want to share a second example from my own experience because it highlights a different kind of motivation barrier. I worked with another one of my children. We'll call him John, age 9, during summer math practice. John did not simply dislike math. What I noticed was that he rushed, guessed, and avoided showing his thinking whenever the work became challenging. When I asked him what was going on, he finally told me he did not like how long the work took him, and he did not want to look stupid when he made mistakes. That was revealing. John was not only avoiding effort, he was protecting himself from embarrassment. This connects to performance avoidance and goal orientation theory. This is a pattern in which the goal is not to learn or improve, but to avoid looking incompetent. When students think this way, they may choose guessing, rushing, or refusal because those behaviors feel safer than honest effort. This performance avoidance John was revealing is an example of the next theory we want to talk about, goal orientation theory. This theory explains why we pursue goals. In this case with John, he tried to avoid his goal of completing the math work because he did not want to appear incompetent to others. I had to come up with a strategy to help focus on the desire to improve his competence and to achieve feeling more confident in completing all of his work. The third strategy I used was to normalize mistakes and redirect Jackson toward process instead of image. I told him that showing thinking was more important than getting every answer right on the first try. I praised his risk-taking, his persistence, and visible problem-solving rather than his speed. I also broke the task into smaller parts and responded calmly when he made errors, so mistakes no longer felt like proof that he was bad at math. Over time, which spanned over a couple of days, that helped shift the emotional climate around the work. He became more willing to write, explain, and stay with a problem. Now my colleague is going to share how attribution theory and goal orientation theory showed up in her own work with adult learners and professionals.
Hello, I'm Mayra Padilla. In my segment, I want to build on my partner's foundation by sharing what I observed through my own experiences working with adult learners and colleagues. One thing I notice is that the same motivation patterns we see in children appear just as clearly in adults. Elizabeth's story. One example came from my work with my colleague I will call Elizabeth. Elizabeth wanted to earn her ESOL endorsement so she could better support English learners. But she was deeply anxious about taking the certification exam. Elizabeth had previously failed a different certification exam, and that experience affected how she viewed her ability. Instead of seeing the experiences as one unsuccessful attempt, she began to believe that simply was not capable. She told herself that she was not smart enough to pass this type of test. Over time, that belief lowered her confidence and reduced her motivation to try again. This is the attribute theory in action. When people attribute failure to stable internal causes, such as believing they do not have the ability to succeed, they often become discouraged because that causes feels permanent. When someone believes the problem is who I am, effort can begin to feel pointless because they do not see a way to change that outcome. Elizabeth's original attribute was that her failure came from a lack of ability, which felt permanent and outside of her control. My goal was to help her shift that believing toward controllable factors such as preparation, effective study strategies, and effort. Goal orientation. I also view Elizabeth's situation through goal orientation theory. Elizabeth was showing signs of performance avoidance orientation. Her focus was not on learning the material and improving her skills. Instead, she was focused on avoiding failure and not wanting others to see her as incapable. The first strategy I used was helping Elizabeth reframe the reason behind her previous failure. Instead of seeing it as a lack of ability, we focused on factors she could control, including preparation, practice, and persistence. The second strategy was helping her recognize her fear of failure was influencing her decision. Once she identified those thought patterns, she could begin replacing them with growth, focus, mindset. In this part of my segment, I want to show how this motivation concept applied beyond certification exams and into another real world situation. I worked with someone I will call Catherine, who wanted to become a stronger runner and reach her goal of completing a 10K race. Catherine often compared herself to runners who had more experience, and those comparisons quickly lowered her confidence. Instead of focusing on her own progress, she worried about her speed, how others viewed her, and whether other people were naturally better runners. I recognized the same performance avoidance pattern that I saw with Elizabeth. Catherine was focused more on avoiding failure and not appearing unsuccessful rather than on developing her skills and celebrating improvement. The third strategy I used was attributional retraining. I helped Catherine change how she interpreted challenges and setbacks. Instead of believing success depended on natural athletic ability, we focused on factors within her control, such as consistency, pacing, training habits, and effort. We talked about improving in running develops through repetition practice and persistence over time. Small steps build confidence. The fourth strategy I used was breaking a large goal into smaller ones, manageable steps. Instead of focusing only on the full 10K race, we created a weekly plan with realistic goals, gradually increasing in distance and milestones she could celebrate along the way. We tracked her runs, reflect on improvements, and treated each small success as evidence that her effort and strategies were working. This helped Catherine see that she was making progress. Her distance increased, her stamina improved, and her confidence grew through practice. Over time, Catherine became less focused on providing herself compared to others and more focused to improve herself. This represented the shift from performance avoidance orientations towards mastery approach. My partner's work with children reflected many of the same motivational principles. And in the next segment, she will bring our examples together and explain how these strategies can support diverse learners.
Now I would like to bring our ideas together. In my work with Sally and John, and in the experiences my partner shared from her work with Elizabeth and Catherine, the same principle keeps showing up. People are more likely to persist when they believe outcomes can change through effort, strategy, and support. Causal attribution theory helps explain what people believe caused an outcome, while goal orientation theory helps explain what kind of goal mindset they bring into the task. When learners think failure means they lack ability, or when they focus mainly on avoiding embarrassment, motivation tends to collapse. That is why the strategies across both of our examples fit so well together. We help learners shift attributions toward controllable causes, recognize avoidance patterns, reframe failure, and break goals into smaller, winnable steps. For struggling readers, this may sound like helping a student move from "I'm just bad at reading" to "I can use one strategy at a time, practice consistently, and improve." In my classroom, that can mean modeling a decoding strategy, chunking text, or using supports that make progress visible. For gifted learners, I see a different risk. Some students avoid challenge because they want to protect the image of being naturally smart. In those moments, I try to frame effort as evidence of growth, not weakness. Productive struggle is not a threat to identity, it's a part of learning. For bilingual and multilingual learners, these theories matter because language development can easily become tied to self belief. If a student starts thinking mistakes in English mean they are not capable, avoidance can grow quickly. I want those students to hear that language grows through use, mistakes, feedback, and time. For students with exceptionalities, this work becomes even more important. Many have experienced repeated frustration and may already carry the belief that success is out of reach. Helping them connect progress to strategy, accommodation, persistence, and support can be powerful because it restores a sense of agency. What I keep coming back to is this: motivation grows when learners believe their actions matter. My colleague is going to close our presentation by reflecting on what she learned from her own experiences and by leaving you with a final encouragement you can carry into your own setting.
As I reflect on my own work with Elizabeth and Catherine, what stands out most is that motivation changed when their stories about themselves changed. Once they stopped seeing failure as proof of inability and started seeing progress as something they could influence, they became more willing to act. I learned that my role is not to force confidence into someone. My role is to help create the conditions where confidence can grow. Clearer strategies, manageable steps, honest reflections, and language that ties success to effort and preparation. If you're an educator, coach, leader, or parent, I want to encourage you to listen closely to the explanations people give for failure. Those explanations matter. When someone says in words or behavior, "I can't," there's often an attribution underneath that belief, just waiting to be challenged. So here's my call to action. This week, choose one learner, one colleague, or a family member who seems stuck. Help that person identify one controllable factor and take one to help.